I read today that Senator Marco Rubio is going to vote against the Republican House continuing resolution because he's sick and tired of the way these things are being nibbled at, and it's not effective. It's not addressing what underlies our problem here. Senator Rubio, how are you, sir?
I'm doing well. How are you?
Very well. So tell us what's going on.
Well, nothing. That's the problem. They're not doing anything about the most important problem of our time. I mean, I don't think your audience is one that needs to be reminded, but let's do it anyway of why we're facing this. The United States government is $1 trillion a year endeavor, and it has no budget. When the Democrats controlled this place last year, they had the House, they had the Senate, they had the White House. They didn't pass a budget. I don't know of any entity any serious entity that doesn't have a budget. I'm sure your show has one. I know you have one. I have one in my household. People all over the country have their own personal budgets. The federal government is not operating on a budget. It's operating on these things they call continuing resolutions, and the thing expired, and now every 2 weeks they come up with some new one at the last minute. And in the meantime, nobody wants to talk about one of the greatest issues of our time, and that is that we have a government that every day borrows $4 billion, a bunch of it from the Chinese, just to keep the lights on, and it's outrageous.
Well, also, this CR, I don't understand this. This CR continues to fund Obamacare. It continues to fund the EPA's efforts to regulate the economy through the back door through carbon dioxide. When are we going to address that?
Well, and that's part of what they call these riders, which is where you can also defund bad public policy, and that should be a part of this as well. And so what I'd like us to do is two things. Number one, let's pass a budget that finishes off the rest of the year with significant reductions in discretionary spending. Number two, let's make sure that budget defunds some of the bad public policy that this administration has forced through the Congress when they were in control of both chambers. And number three, let's get to work on this issue of the debt. And right now, there doesn't seem to be a comprehensive plan to do any of those three things. It's just this waiting game, and what they're waiting for, I think, is for this debt limit thing to be on top of us, and then they're going to come and say, oh, here we go, we have no time to work on this, let's just continue, let's just kick the can down the road for another year. And this is the way they've been doing business around here for a long time, and it's the reason why we're in the mess that we're in.
And, of course, next year starts the election for the House and some of your colleagues in the Senate, and that's what they're going to be focused on, not the budget.
Well, I think the president's already focused on that, and that's why he's not even engaged. I mean, he's taken off to Latin America this weekend, and he had the vice president gone to Russia last weekend. And look, you cannot solve generational issues, and that's what this debt issue is. It's a generational issue. You cannot solve issues of this magnitude without presidential leadership. This president isn't just leading, he's missing in action on this issue, and I think even members of his own party have called him out on that last week.
I'm going to tell you something, and I'm not telling you this to where you say, oh, no, I'm not ready. Why don't you consider throwing your hat in the ring, honestly, for President of the United States? People, no, just hold on. I want to make the point. I know you have more experience than Barack Obama's ever had. Let's be blunt about that, too. I mean, the way you talk, the things that you say, your thinking process. I've been in the conservative movement for 40 years. I know a superstar when I see one. I'm not trying to kiss. I'm telling you for the sake of my children. Is it something that you'd be willing to consider? You're just going to flatly rule it out?
I'll tell you why I have to, because this job that I have is more than enough. I mean, the United States Senate's an important institution, and being a senator is an important job. I can influence for the betterment of our country from the spot that I'm in. The minute you start talking about doing other things, everyone starts viewing everything you do as related to that. That's the problem we have. We have so many people they care more about winning their next election than they do about saving our country. In essence, they're willing to do whatever it takes to win their election, even if it ultimately means losing your country. And I don't want to fall into that. I really think that what we need are voices in the Senate and the House and throughout the American political spectrum that call this issue out for what it is. I mean, Mark, think about for a second what we've done here. We are fighting over 14% of the budget, okay? And that's not an insignificant thing. I mean, the discretionary spending needs to be addressed. We've got Medicare, Medicaid, and Social Security that if we do not reform those programs, they will bankrupt themselves and they will bankrupt America. And nobody here wants to talk about it. It's like if you walked home one day and found an alligator in your living room and everyone pretend that's not an alligator, that's an iguana. No, it's not. It's an alligator, and it's going to hurt you. Same thing with this debt. This thing is serious. It's $14 trillion and growing, and there doesn't seem to be any willingness to tackle it in a meaningful way.
You seem to be frustrated with the Republicans, too, though. I mean, there's really, about 10 of you now who are saying, you know what, we're not voting for this.
Yeah.
Who are speaking like you, who are making proposals, who insist that you spend time on the big issues. This has to be very frustrating for you.
Well, let me say this about first of all, the job that Speaker Boehner has and Leader McConnell had, those are tough jobs, and I understand they've got to balance the process with how they feel, and I know they agree with us on these issues, and there are a lot of competing interests, and I get that. On the other hand, to me, and I've only been here 10 weeks now, but to me, this whole back and forth kind of political dance, I just don't have the patience for it, to be honest with you, and maybe that's a good thing. Maybe I'll never fit in up here, and perhaps that's a positive, because this issue didn't happen overnight. Okay, this debt is not a surprise. The fact that we didn't have a budget is not a surprise. This has been looming for some time. This debt has been growing for some time, clearly accelerated over the last 2.5 years. This should not be a surprise to anybody. And facing an issue that threatens to literally redefine what our country is and what its role is in the world, I don't understand why we aren't dealing with that immediately. It's one of the reasons I just voted to move on the small business bill. It's because I don't understand how we can be taking up any issues as long as we're facing a $14 trillion debt that grows by $4 billion a day.
Well, let me ask you this. Okay, I understand you're not going to run, but let's pretend you're president for a day. Would you be so, I don't know, like uninvolved or disinterested or distant from what's going on? You're president of the United States. This guy just doesn't seem to give a damn. Or his argument is for more spending and more debt. How do you make any sense out of this?
Well, I can't make any sense out of it. I can only comment on the impact that it's having on the process. And the impact it's having on the process is that last week the Democrats in the Senate offered their version of a budget, and their version of a budget would cut $6 billion, which is basically what we borrow every 36 hours. So that's not a serious way to look at it. And let me tell you where this is having an impact. It's not just a political impact. The markets are looking at this stuff. And the world economy is looking at the inaction of the American political class on these issues. And what they're slowly starting to conclude is that this administration and at least half of this Congress is not serious about growth, is not serious about turning the economic ship around, and it's going to start to have an impact. Look, the president's going to Latin America this week. We've lost market share. That Chile, for example, their largest trading partner is no longer the United States, it's China. I mean, that's devastating news to receive. Same thing happening in Brazil, same thing happening throughout the Western Hemisphere. That's in our own backyard. We are walking away, this president, this administration is walking away from American economic leadership, not to mention leadership on other fronts. And I don't know what their motives are, but I can tell you it's bad news for our future.
What about the immorality of doing this to children and grandchildren, to people yet born, to their freedom and their prosperity? I mean, the immorality of a temporary political class, because let's face it, that's what it is, amassing this debt and placing this burden on future generations. It's just stunning to me.
Well, here's what's more stunning. We used to say that a couple of years ago. This is about our children, our grandchildren, and it is. But here's what's startling. This thing has spiraled out of control so fast that it's not just about our children and grandchildren anymore. It's about us. If they continue doing what they are doing now, you and I are going to live soon to see the day where the United States is going to face a debt crisis. We used to talk about the impact this is going to have on them 20 years from now, 10 years from now. How about a year and a half from now? How about 8 months from now? How about the impact it's already having? I mean, our economy simply is not growing the way it should be growing. Our economy, the U.S. economy's recovery, is slower than that of other countries around the world because of overregulation, a complicated and burdensome tax code, all sorts of onerous provisions through Obamacare and the EPA that are being placed on the economy. And you add to all that the uncertainty created by this debt. It's a recipe for economic disaster.
By the way, there's a new report out by the Tax Foundation. We have the second highest corporate income tax rates in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, and Japan, who I think was ahead of us, is now, obviously they're going through some terrible things, but they were looking at redoing their corporate tax code, which means we were probably going to be number one here fairly soon. So it's nothing to be proud of, that's for sure.
Well, no, because people work for these businesses, and we want to attract investment from abroad, not just borrowing from abroad. Well, listen, I know you have things to do. It's a pleasure to have you on here, and keep up the good work. We're with you.
Thank you. I look forward to coming back with you.
All right, God bless. Excuse me, I'm choked up. Damn, is he good, Mr. Producer, or what? I'm telling you. I know he doesn't have a YouTube guy constantly putting his stuff out there. I know George Will isn't out there hawking them and all the rest of it. Or Krauthammer. Who cares? That guy's the real deal. He's the real deal. And there are others like him, too. There really are. From my perspective, Sarah Palin's the real deal. Michelle Bachmann's the real deal. Rand Paul's the real deal. Whether you support them for president or not, it's not my point. These are people who understand the dire circumstances this nation is in and want to do something about it. If not, run for higher office or run for their existing office to work to help organize people and get the message out. This is what's crucial. You do not hear this kind of talk from the Republican rhinos who are scared of their own shadows and don't know what to do because some of them helped create this mess. I like the fresh blood. I like the farm team. You have to also remember some of these commentators, conservatives and pseudo-conservatives, they've been sitting on their ass inside the Beltway for 30 or 40 years too. I reported last week, George Will, who I have enormous admiration for, one of the smartest men you'll ever read. Well, he had it dead wrong in 1979 and 80. He backed Howard Baker first. If he had had his way, Ronald Reagan would not have been president because he never would have gotten out of the nominating process in the Republican Party. Not just in 76, where he didn't, but in 80, where he did. So these were people, millions of them, who disagreed with George Will, that nominated Ronald Reagan for President of the United States. As I also reported, Charles Krauthammer, another extremely intelligent man, I agree with him about 80% of the time, but a very decent human being, too. He was writing speeches for Walter Mondale. Both men mature not only of body, but mature of mind, and yet they hadn't evolved enough, conservatively speaking, obviously, to see Ronald Reagan as the great leader he would be. And neither of them, to the best of my knowledge, were at the forefront of noticing and promoting and embracing the Tea Party movement. That's two major conservative revolutions, crucial to the future of this nation. So no, I don't rely on them to tell us who we should vote for and who we shouldn't vote for. In fact, I find it a little arrogant, to be perfectly honest with you. I thought Jonah Goldberg's last column, or the one before, was superb. Absolutely superb. He said the people will decide. You know, you'll decide. Now, I have my opinions just as they do, but you're going to decide.